Well, first of all, I would like to say that it's a great pleasure for me to be here with you once again. This is the 13th of the annual conferences of SteelOrbis. I attended 12th of them. And last year's conference I wasn't able to attend because we had a meeting at the president's office for the project that I'm working on. That's why I wasn't able to participate, and I really missed it. So it's great to be back with you today. So let's talk about the Turkish steel sector in general. Of course, you can't think about the Turkish sector separately from the global sector. And then I'll talk about the expectations. In 2018, the world's crude steel production had positive trends, and this positive trend was mainly guided by the People's Republic of China. About 7% growth is there, and this comes from mainly China with a growth of 6.1%. We also have other emerging countries apart from China, our neighboring country Iran and Vietnam at 20%. Their growth rate is 20%. And the growth of Iran is also impacting Turkey. They are trying to export to Turkey. And then we have a moderate growth of 2% on average basis. These are the growth figures that you see on the screen. 6.1% is the growth for China. India ranks the second. Well, of course, it's very exceptional to see a downward trend once you have a good position, and Turkey ranks the 8th. Crude steel production for Turkey in 2017 was 13.5%. Very nice performance, and it increased to 37.5 million tons. But in 2018, Turkey had some problems. Well, independently of the economic situation, the steel sector specifically might face some problems despite the good economic indicators. For instance, in 2009 there was the global turmoil, and then we had ups and downs in the coming years. But this time, for us, everything was going well. But the economic indicators in Turkey, and because of foreign relations, certain negative trends emerged. So the production and export indicators that were going very well during the first half of the year went upside down actually starting from June. So normally we were expecting 37 million tons to increase all the way up to 40 million tons because we had a growth of 8%. But now we started to ask, are we really going to achieve the 37 million tons? Currently, we're still in the positive. We have 5% shrinkage for September, but currently it's 0.9% plus 0.9%. So we're going to see if during November and December we're going to keep it to at this level. Maybe we will go down slightly. That's what the indicators show us, because consumption really regressed a lot. What about capacity utilization? We have a humble improvement. I call it humble because we had 60s before, 60%. But looking back, there were also years that we reached 80-85%. But most one would be 75%. That's what it should be. Currently, 71.8% capacity utilization rate is 71.8%. In the last 5 years, our capacity is about 50 million tons. In 2016, between 2006 and 2012, we were a country, a dynamic country that was able to double the capacity, and in the last 5 years we are stagnating actually, and this is actually a loss both for our sector and for our economy, and this is despite the continuous and stable increase in our consumption, meaning we can't say that domestic demand is not enough, that's why there is stagnation in our capacity. No, we have enough demand, but capacity is still the same, because we have a foreign trade policy that actually encourages imports. For flat products, there is an improvement for flat products. For this year especially, for crude steel production, for flats there was 600,000 tons of increase, but for long ones there is a decrease of 400,000 tons. Well, in the 1998 we had the crisis between Russia and China. At that time it was 80 to 20%. Flat ones were 3 million tons, and at this point in time the situation is really changed. It's almost 30 to 40%. It's healthier. Flat steel production is much healthier to cater to the needs of the industry, and in terms of capacity utilization it seems that we have reached our target of balancing them. Looking at the production amounts for the first 9 months, even though there is a decline for August and September, we have seen that this decline is more humble for flats and more sharper for long products. In terms of capacity utilization, for flat products in 2015 we had 44% of capacity utilization, and in 2018 we have 70%, which should be considered as a success, but this could be considered a success for Turkey. Looking at the global standards, we still have room for progress, and let me just say this, these rates are because of the low capacity utilization for electric arc furnace facilities. Integrated facilities sometimes work with more than 100% capacity. As I have said, for long products capacity there is no problem, but for utilization there is a decline, and hopefully we expect to see an improvement in the coming years. What about the world's finished steel consumption? The picture, the outlook for the world is different than Turkey. Normally in Turkey we used to be in a better position compared to the world situation, but this time now in the world steel sector consumption increased by about 4%, but in our country the consumption is negative, especially in the last months. Yes, 2018 first 9 months, in terms of consumption we have minus 4.6%. There is a decline, but this is the average of 9 months. In the most recent months, especially for long products, there is more than 50% of decline in consumption. So this minus 4.6% is currently not reflecting the real situation that we have in Turkey. This is because of the increase in the initial months of the year. Yes, Turkey's finished steel production is still higher than last year, but most probably it will be difficult to keep it at this level in the coming 2 months. We will try to protect last year's levels. And in terms of finished steel consumption, we have a decline of about 1.2 million tons, mainly coming from long products. For flat products, despite the extraordinary decline in the most recent years, we are at a break-even point compared to last year. But if the problem continues in the coming 2 months, maybe we will see negative figures for that as well. But flat products have a more stable course. They are more integrated with the industry. And compared to sectors using long products, industry has the option to set a balance by exporting these products. But for long products, we don't have that chance. For construction sector, for instance, you can set the balance by selling real estate, but the weight for that in the entire sector won't be higher than 5%. Despite incentives for foreign buyers, we can say that their contribution won't be more than 5%. So we need to increase the domestic demand instead of focusing on foreign investors. So hopefully this will change in the coming months and there will be more domestic demand. Yes, with the most recent developments, we have seen some regression in our imports, as it seems. But even this regression compared to the first 9 months of 2017 is still 3 points higher. I'm talking about the share of imports in total consumption. It's 47.4%, because now they're talking about having not trading in hard currency, but this relative decline in the recent months couldn't prevent imports from being high, so it's still in the positive. So Turkey's total steel trade, imports and exports. So our exports used to be much higher than imports. Back in 2015, for instance, imports was higher than exports, but as of today, for the first 9 months of 2018, our exports is 3 million tons higher than our imports. So there is a comeback in our exports, and hopefully this won't be a temporary one, and it will be long-lasting, regardless of the domestic demand. So Turkey's total steel export-import ratio, 2012 it was 152%, record high, and then in 2015, a year which was a disastrous year for Turkey and for world, because the Chinese products originally from China invaded the entire market, Turkey as well, 3 million tons. So that year export-import ratio, despite our capacity, was 95%, and capacity utilization rates dropped all the way down to 60%. And now, as of 9th month, it's 121%. We believe this can go up to 130%. October, figures taken into consideration, there will be more than 40% of increase in exports. So there is going to be an improvement in the exports for the next quarter as well. And this makes Turkey a net steel exporter. So we are a net steel exporting country. Among the exporters of the world, largest steel exporters of the world, we used to be among the top 9, but now we are among the top 8. And in 2018, we hope it will increase and we will rank among the top 5 countries. For exporters, we said 2015 was a disastrous year, Even though we had the production capacity, we were the fifth importer, and currently we are the sixth largest steel importer of the world, and we believe this will drop down to 9 or 10 by the end of this year. So, to conclude, I would like to say that Turkey's total steel demand is increasing in a healthy way, and Turkey's production capacity will no longer be able to cater to the needs, so we need to increase capacity, and this is something that we can achieve without relying on imports. Well, after the elections in 2010, we had some problems, maybe due to the Turkish economy, but most recently we had problems that can't be explained with the overall situation. According to my opinion, certain vulnerabilities in the Turkish economy, with a subjective intervention of President Trump directly targeting Turkey, and with efforts of certain people, the problem became a very serious one. So all the actors in the market, users, suppliers, manufacturers, producers, consumers, everyone suffered, and the dollar exchange rate went up to 7 from 4 liras, and imagine you have a sailing vessel with 10 million US dollars worth of products. Overnight they increased the amount of money that they had to pay. So we know that the Turkish economy doesn't deserve such sharp fluctuations. Of course, we have our shortcomings, but I believe that these shortcomings will be overcome, and we have partially already overcome these problems. The private sector has realized their debts. Now private sector is paying back their loans, and the Turkish real sector is doing its best. So we believe that the Turkish steel industry and steel using industries will actually find their roadmaps, and I believe that what's missing here is a consumption pattern depending on foreign imports. We are importing 10 million tons of flat products. It's not healthy. If you import all these goods, you can't produce in a healthy way. Previously, for Far East, South Korea, we had trips with Mr. Namık, and there is an understanding in these Asian countries that tries to avoid imports and that tries to focus on local production. So sometimes the authorities try to incentivize imports because of the demands. For instance, in the construction, there was a tax for rebar for 30%, and it was gradually zeroed, and everywhere the anti-dumping duties were imposed all around the world, and in Europe and in US alike. So these high dumping duties are not reasonable. They actually pose an obstacle for free trade, but there is a reality. This is in place. This is implemented. I attended the OECD meeting at the end of August, beginning of September, and the American delegate said that China had a very high capacity, and this capacity posed a threat for the rest of the world, and government incentives allowed for utilization of inefficient capacities. And I took the floor and I said, we used to say all these things, but they are no longer valid, these arguments, these statements. Now, what's on our agenda is these safeguard measures, protectionist measures, unilaterally imposed by the United States. And he said, these are not government incentives. I said, I know these are not incentives, but they have the same effect at the end of the day. And world steel prices increased by 11% all around the world, and in US it increased by 40%. And it's because of the government incentives for the steel sector in US. So this additional 30% is the increase on top of the high price, the already high price. Now, there is a price difference of 400 US dollars per ton. So, with the government incentives, the competition is totally distorted. Another thing, the US government representative said that we do everything abiding by the rules. We don't do anything to breach the rules, but these are all wrong statements. You can say them, but nobody would believe you. Imagine a president of a country who would say, I instructed my colleagues and they will increase it to 50% tomorrow. And you would claim that this is objective. No. In the past, at least people would work on it for 6 months just to be able to say that, yes, we have been working on this and we found some reasons to increase the taxes. But no, this is no longer the case. Overnight, they increase the taxes. So this is distorting the steel trade in the world, and this is also distorting free trade, because what Turkey has done is that Turkey looked at the lists and saw that a reaction can't be shown to the steel sector. So what happened? It was to increase, for instance, the taxes for automotive industry. Talisman was going to establish a production network here. They didn't do it. They gave up. And also the Turkish government increased the telecommunication taxes. So it's actually reflected on other sectors, which shouldn't be the case. So the Americans shouldn't be doing things to distort the free trade. They defend it only if it's in their favor, but if it's going to be a situation where they will be negatively impacted, they take certain measures.
As for our relations with the EU, when we look at the figures of the last decade, we see that the deficit is always to their favor. For years it was 1 to 2. We sold 1 and bought 2 in return. Come 2018, our exports were revitalized and in 2008. But come 2018, our exports again have revitalized to a certain degree, and Europe made an announcement saying that Turkey's exports need to be stopped and how this is not acceptable. And that's because of the revitalization in the last couple of months. And everyone can see why this is. The demand, domestic demand is 50%, went down by 50%, 20%. And those enterprises that do not have any other way out would like to go to places where there's a demand, and they are moving towards other markets. And instead of reacting to this, why don't we wait for a year, see what happens, and see how the new balance will be struck. And this is how it needs to be done. But Europeans, in the last couple of years actually, when we were doing exports of this nature, we would get together with them due to the FTA between us, and per ton, Turkey would be 100 euros less. So basically we would discuss the figures and give them the Eurostat numbers, and they were shocked. And when we discussed what needed to be done, they said, we were right, and now we've said this, and this is what the agreement between us necessitates. So let us adhere to this agreement, and let's be courteous enough, because we're partners. But the Europeans didn't want to talk to us, and they opened an investigation and they put us in the inside that, and we are a part of that, and some people are saying that a certain tax should be levied upon Turkey. Then why did we sign that FTA? Why have we been so open towards Europe for the last decade? So in short, the Republic of Turkey needs to protect the Turkish steel industry, just like other countries are doing. We need to be protected by the state. The state sector needs to be strong in a nation for steel users to be free in terms of their capacity for maneuver, because the margins are $5 to $10, and we need to answer this question. Consumers in the States pay $400 and they export all across the globe despite this, and the Europeans as well. And in Turkey, steel in Turkey is much cheaper than other countries. But I also know that the following is also true. Some users, this 25% fund is treated as if it's going to be received at the outset, and that it's reflected on the prices, but this is a discrepancy based on the practice, and we should challenge them, we shouldn't accept them. So by and large, actually, Turkey continues to grow. Turkey will continue to grow as well, and the way we perceive the problems, of course, must be perhaps managed better. And I wish we could be more prudent and more proactive regarding solving the problems. But we are accustomed to crises. We are weathered by crises. I believe that we are going to overcome the barriers in our sector and in our country, and our sector will make a contribution to that positive attitude. Just like in 2008, 2009, in the steel sector all across the world, there was crisis, whereas in Turkey the capacity grew by twofold, and this had a positive impact on all steel manufacturers. And I think the same thing is going to happen for another time in Turkey. So the increase in consumption can be met from within, and that's the kind of structure that we should be moving towards. We need to build capacity, and we need to make sure that there are more opportunities for all the stakeholders, and hopefully we are going to reduce the problems and solve the problems between us and other partners. Once again, I'd like to thank you very much for your participation and greet you once again with my deepest regards. Veysel Bey, we'd like to thank you very much. Any questions? So any questions for Veysel Bey? But before that, let me ask you a question to kick this off. The US and the EU have both exhibited a protectionist approach, and you have talked about the fact that this is really unfair. But what I'd like to know is this. You have been following this quite closely. The World Trade Organization, in cases of this kind, will they fall short of introducing any ramifications, putting this under the pretext of reciprocity? Does it absolve them of any responsibility vis-a-vis WTO? Well, here's the thing. International organizations are under the pressure of the United States of America, and that's why if they start making objective decisions, then the US is going to muddle the waters. Like President Trump withdrew from many organizations, ceased some payments, and so on and so forth. And regarding WTO, President Trump says this organization is not functioning. So what he's trying to say is he is making it public that he's taking some steps that are in contravention with the principles of WTO. But if they resist that, then there's going to be a distance a chasm between the US and WTO. That's why WTO's reactions will always be super prudent and really timid. But we are going through this process, and everyone knows how things are. at the OECD, when they say everything must be done according to the rules, then I can challenge them, like national security, construction steel. Why is it a matter of national security? I ask. That's what I did, and I told them that they had no credibility. And during the break, they came up to me and said that I was right. But this is really unfair. Some protectionist measures, we know about them, but about steel products, I mean, all of us had a dumping case brought against us, right? Many of us, at least, when we were exporting to the States. Why is this the case with the US all the time? The US, Canada, um, for their own sectors, when the margin is less than $300, they think this is not sufficient, and they do not divert this to investment. If they invest, maybe things will change. They distribute it to shareholders, because the structure there is based on distributing dividends. So a family company in Turkey for 1 million tons, if they have a profit rate of 2%, then they're happy. But 20% is not enough in the States. And in order to preserve this structure, they're introducing all these rules, and these rules are in contravention with the principles of WTO. But WTO has a difficult time making this case. But hopefully, a new balance can be struck. A reasonable new balance can be struck. Again, at this meeting, I told them that they were disrupting the system, and that they were wreaking havoc. This is what they're doing. They are wreaking havoc with the global system. Maybe it's not so strong, but we can always find solutions. But even that imperfect system is losing credibility fast. And who is going to incur the greatest loss from this? The parties that make the greatest benefit, which is them. That's why this needs to be corrected, and I do believe that this is going to happen. But the reason why I believe this to be the case is because politically, yes, um, we thought politics were much more civilized in the States, but look at what they're doing against Mexico and Canada. Their reactions are rather sharp. They're canceling some agreements, and then they started signing new FTAs at more favorable conditions, and um, but many things were disturbed. So they're trying to break things first and then try and correct it. So I'm hoping that this will be the same, and hopefully relations with Turkey will improve as well, so that we never experience what we experienced this year. Thank you very much. Any other questions for the gentleman from the audience? Good morning, and thank you, Veysel Bey, and we'd like to thank SteelOrbis as well. So for 10 years now, we have been following this, and the threat is always changing. Threat of exports, China, and then protectionism, and this threat is always shape-shifting, and everyone's trying to protect their own markets as a result. So the Steel Manufacturers Association, how do you see the sector in 5 years' time? Not today, but 5 years down the line. How should we prepare ourselves as an association and as um, stakeholders in this industry? And Veysel Bey, also I'd like to thank you for this presentation. Mehmet has just asked a question, and here's what I'd like to say additionally. Now, we always talk about the pressure, but what are the weaknesses of our steel sector? What are our weaknesses in terms of production, in terms of commerce, and the like? How about our own weaknesses? And as an industry, what should we do to address these weaknesses? Thank you. Well, I'm not super knowledgeable about this, but actually, um, we have all pondered these questions, all of us, and we all have certain answers to these questions. We have discussed this at great length, and how to establish a better steel sector, how to move things forward, how to take things to the next level. And some companies are doing this actually in Turkey. There are certain corporations, some entities that started with an investment and then established foreign partnerships and then ventured into Africa, to Senegal, and other nations. We have also some other companies, by diversifying their products, they have increased their depth, and as a result, they have met the demand, international demand from here. But what's essential is this: the demand is on the rise, and um, it's not enough to want to meet this demand domestically, and we shouldn't make any excuses. We should meet the demand. The Ministry of Economy and Trade asks whether we have this product, that product. We have this, but this we can manufacture soon. That shouldn't be our response. We should be able to say, this is our annual production. Yes, we do manufacture that, and this is our production pipeline. We need to be prepared. This is what is needed in Turkey right now. Export dependency is not the way to go. We can export well today. There's a demand, still demand in the world. But other countries are also seeing this demand, and they're building new capacities. Maybe they're much more skillful in this regard. So they are trying to make the best use of demand without delay, and that should not be a problem for us. So we need to be in sync with the domestic demand. That's what our production should be based on, and we need to restructuralize this as soon as possible. Of course, we have some weaknesses in terms of technologies, in terms of demands of the automotive sector. We need to address these as soon as possible. So we need to set our sights on abroad, on international demand, but we should always be cognizant of the sorts of problems that we might encounter. In 2001, with Section 205, regarding Section 205, we also had the same problem. The European Union targeted us directly, and it took 8 or 9 months to overcome the problem. We don't know how long it will take this time around. So we need to be able to weather these storms. And actually, the steel sector is quite well prepared for incidents of this kind. And when you have 2 consecutive good years, that's great. If you have 3 consecutive good years, it's a miracle. It's never 4 years. And I mean, the high tide is only there for a couple of years, and then you have a dip that goes on for a couple of years. So we need to be prepared for all of these ups and downs, but we need to focus on domestic demand. We need to diversify our products. In the past, some companies manufactured only construction rods, but some are now doing profiles, some flat products. So things are changing in Turkey, and these changes will continue. Turkish companies are always trying to excel at what they do. Everyone's trying to look at their export items, and also they're looking at the domestic demand, and the state has this sensitivity as well in terms of domestic capacity utilization, because the Turkish economy cannot be sustained with such a big deficit. We're talking about 60 billion US dollars. You can save that for a year, and the next year it's going to be 120 billion US dollars. There's no way you will find this money, and you will lose credibility, and your credit lines are going to be shut off, and so on and so forth. So we need to address this problem. You can experience this once and twice, but you cannot experience this continuously. So no one should exploit the other party. No one should try to push the other party into a corner. We need to work as stakeholders, and we need to focus on domestic procurement of demand. We need to establish a new structure, and we need to do what the market necessitates. I mean, some people say, I do construction roads, but no, we can't say that. We need to venture into new products, and we need to produce what is demanded. We need to produce value-added products, and all our companies are actually working on this in Turkey right now, and we have made great strides in this regard. Like I said previously, Erdemir is a great example of this. They have always been improving themselves, opening up service centers, and they're trying to reach out to even the remotest consumer. No longer is the producer the king, but it's the customer who is the king, and all our companies are working with this perspective. So, in the upcoming 5 years, or 10 years, or 15 years, um, we need to recognize that the Turkish economy cannot thrive without the steel industry, and that's how we need to remodel our investments. Thank you, Veysel Bey.